You're listening to Balancing Point. Today's episode is going to be a little unusual because early this morning, Hezbollah officially announced the death of its longtime leader, Hassan Nasrallah, in an Israeli airstrike yesterday. The assassination of Nasrallah was the culmination of about a week of Israeli military activity, starting on September 17th, when it was revealed that they'd infiltrated Hezbollah's ostensibly secure communications network and destroyed it, and in the process injured hundreds of Hezbollah members. With its comms down, Hezbollah's members were forced to use more easily detectable methods of communication and come out into the open, and that led to a series of further airstrikes on Hezbollah targets, as of this morning, killing virtually everyone in the group's high command. This has been one of the most successful decapitation strikes of all time, so we're really in uncharted territory here, and nobody's quite sure what's going to happen next. It may be the lead up to a broader war, or it may have prevented one. We here are just going to have to wait and see. Now, of course, we at Balancing Point did not plan for this, and it's going to overshadow what was meant to be a broader discussion about Lebanon's longtime political crisis, how the dysfunction of the political system has endured for more than 50 years, how it's led to support for Hezbollah, what impact the ongoing war is having on ordinary Lebanese, and what steps they and the international community can take to resolve some of these enduring problems. So our guest today is Adnan Nasser. He's an independent journalist based in Beirut, where he's had a ground view of many of these developments. He's written for them for publications like Al Monitor and The National Interest, and he's one of the most insightful analysts of this crisis that I know. And so we're very pleased to get the opportunity to talk to him today. With that, I will turn things over to Arman, who, by the way, has had a very wet past few days because of the hurricane down in Florida. So I'm also glad that you could make it today, and I know that you've been through a lot recently. So I hope you're all right, and I will turn things over to you.
Thank you, Trevor, and thank you for the kind introduction. It's good to be back on the podcast, on our podcast. Yes, as you said, the circumstances in Florida was a little bit, unusual, but I'm quite confident that the circumstances and Adnan that is dealing is way worse, which one of the causes that we unfortunately can't have him on video, but we are very grateful that have him at all at the show. So Adnan, before going forward, well, as Trevor mentioned, you're an expert of the Lebanese politics. You've been familiar with the region, with the country on both local and national level closely. I want to start, what happened to the Lebanon? I mean, well, Lebanon used to be a prosperous country with a relatively stable economy. It used to be, if I stand correct, they used to refer to the Beirut as the Paris of the Middle East. But today's situation is a little bit different. And I'm not only talking about, the current clash between Hezbollah and Israel, which is going to make a drastic impact on Lebanese, but on all levels, the economy of the country has been shrunk. Some bankers have been seen and have read their stories, have even difficulty to pay back people's deposit. The Lebanese army, which is supposed to be the protector of the sovereignty of the country, has difficulty on many levels, even to the extent that on and off they have problem with feeding their own soldiers, and Jordanian we've been helping them. The Hezbollah Charity Institute, the Al Hassan, is kind of the greatest or the largest bank. Many people in Lebanon are either own debt to it, or they gave their gold or foreign currency or any reserve that he had to this charity. It seems, if I stand correct, and correct me please, Lebanon today has a shell of a nation state, but it is mostly operating on a nation state that is kind of, I don't want to say being taken hostage, but it is being mostly run by the non-state actors. Am I correct? And if I'm correct, what got us here? What happened to the country, to a very beautiful country?
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you both to Trevor and you, Armand, for inviting me on the podcast. And I kind of share some of Armand's pain because I lived in Florida for most of my life, and I know what hurricanes can bring to the good state of Florida, the Sunshine State. And I still have family in Miami, and we've been in the eyes of many, many storms. So I don't envy you for being over there. But your question, first of all, that was not one question. I'll have to say it was that was a lot, Armand. We're gonna have
Take as much time as you need.
Yeah. So there's no one sentence or 1 hour. How long is this podcast again? We're gonna have to go to answer that. We're gonna have to break the record for the longest podcast ever for phase one to answer that question. But to answer that question, look, we're talking now in the midst of a very successful Israeli assassination of leader of Hezbollah Secretary General Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. And to be blunt, I think he's the highest profile figure that the Israelis have ever killed in maybe its modern history of assassinations. And believe me, there's a lot there. I mean, we were all shocked when the Israelis killed Ismail Haniyeh, the leader of Hamas, in the middle of Iran. And we thought maybe this is where it's going to end, that this so-called axis of resistance is going to retaliate in full force or in some meaningful way that will match what the Israelis had done to them. It looked like actually that it's just one domino out of a whole line of dominoes. And we're so shocked by what Israel has done in this assassination. We haven't had time to get over the first shock that they've put everybody in. From the assassinations of top officials like Fuad Shukr, one that was considered the second in command of Hezbollah. I didn't think that Hassan Nasrallah would be killed, frankly. I thought maybe that they had caught a whiff of what's going on and that they would put him not necessarily like underground, literally, but I didn't think they would have him in Dahya, what is considered the stronghold of Hezbollah in Beirut, southern Beirut. That after the Israelis kept killing Hezbollah officials one by one in the same neighborhood, you would think that they would have moved him around. So I'm just kind of allow me to put my shock on the podcast. And I just still hearing from people back in Beirut, like, how could this happen? And there's also many people in Beirut that are out for blood. I mean, they're wailing and screaming in Nasrallah's name. The traditional slogan, "We're with you, Nasrallah," is still being shouted. And as far as I'm aware, Hezbollah's second in command, Naim Qasim, has been declared the new successor of Hassan Nasrallah. At the same time, we're hearing that the Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has announced there will be some sort of measure taken against Israel for what happened, and they're also declared 5 days of mourning in Iran. So we're in the midst of the unknown, but we can probably guess that there will be some sort of a response for his killing. I don't know what form it would take. My guess is the Iranians and the other members of this so-called axis of resistance will try to assassinate other leaders of Israel. Who knows? Maybe they'll try to eye Yoav Gallant, the Secretary of Defense, if I'm not mistaken, or maybe Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself. I suspect that there's going to be an increase of missile barrages into the north. We might see, I had tweeted, I think yesterday, that what would happen if Hezbollah starts kidnapping Israeli soldiers or even Israeli civilians to try to slow down Israel's assaults on Lebanon. And then you would have a double hostage crisis, one in Gaza and one in Lebanon. Don't forget that Hezbollah historically had kidnapped Israeli soldiers in the past. And that's how the 2006 conflict had erupted in the summer of 2006, the kidnapping of 2 Israeli soldiers, and they were not recovered until there was a exchange. So this is anybody's guess. And you were talking about how is this affecting the people of Lebanon? Well, early in this attack or this offensive by Israel, we now see tens of thousands, maybe now even a total 200,000, I've heard. I don't have any statistics to support that, but definitely tens of thousands of Lebanese residents of the south have fled to Beirut, to the north, to central Lebanon, but no one really feels safe. It's quiet in Beirut today, as far as I'm aware, and nobody wants to go out. And going back to what I said earlier, we are in the midst of the unknown. So pardon that very long answer. But it was a long question, Armand, so I blame you.
Good. So I'm going to be blamed a lot during this podcast. Well, it's good. I'm fine with it. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good. It's good. You're doing something right. The content is very good. What you're asking is relevant, but many things are happening all at once. There's one thing I will say. It is possible with Hassan Nasrallah gone. It might force all the Lebanese parties to come together and elect a new president. I think the best thing that could happen and could be a game changer is if we had a new Lebanese head of state. As you know, that Lebanon's been without a president since Michel Aoun finished his term in 2022, if I'm not mistaken, late 2022. And it's just the last time we had a presidential election. I attended that session in September of 2023. I believe it was September 2023. Hezb and its supporters had left the parliament, which creating a vacuum, and they didn't have the two-third constitutional majority. You have to have a certain percentage of MPs in the parliament for the election to proceed accordingly. So maybe now they might change their tune and be more flexible in search for what they would call a consensus president. I'm not sure if it will happen, but I think the chances may be higher. That's my own intuition.
Just out of curiosity, one of the things that's remarkable about this week has been that Israel did not just kill Nasrallah. They killed everybody. They killed Nasrallah and then the rank of people below him and then the rank of people below him as well. This really was a decapitation, because I don't know if you've seen on Twitter, like the Israeli government has even put up sort of the Hezbollah organization chart, and all the way from Nasrallah on down, the first half dozen or so ranks have been completely destroyed. And so at this point, of course, Hezbollah is still very strong. They still have 100,000 plus, members under arms in Lebanon. But right now, it just seems like it's completely leaderless. And they have I guess, some sort of a successor in place now. But clearly, as an institution, it has been significantly degraded. And so my question then is in the weeks to come, I mean, who speaks for Hezbollah? Like, how is it going to pull together and decide this is the direction that we're going to follow when the entirety of its leadership has just gone up in smoke?
Well, don't forget, many of Hezbollah's supporters are now waiting on what Iran is going to do. And for Hezbollah, Iran is their largest backer in every way. I mean, before Hassan Nasrallah died, he would give speeches saying that we received money from Iran, weapons from Iran, training from Iran. He was very open about that. It was no secret that Hezbollah and Iran were in many ways one and the same. And many saw Hezbollah, if you go to the Dahya neighborhood, you go to any sympathizer with Hezbollah, they will show pictures of the founder of the Islamic Republic of Iran, Khomeini, on one side, picture of him, and then they'll show another picture of the current supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. So they look to Iran for spiritual guidance, direction in how to fight what they call the enemy, in this case, Israel or the United States. So I think it largely depends how Iran reacts to this assassination. But one can never know. I mean, Hezbollah is also an independent actor. Let's not forget that. But I don't think there's anything that they can't go as far as maybe they would like. They need to receive some backing and a green light from Iran. And they need to know that Iran will come to their aid if this turns out to be a full-fledged war.
I want to a little bit go back, because what you mentioned about Hezbollah might try to take hostages in Lebanon, it kind of struck me and got me thinking, because I believe Israeli sources a couple hours ago mentioned that Hezbollah made an attempt. We don't know, but I think something in line in some of the Israelis media outlet came up. Do you think, is there any chance that the reason that the war with Hezbollah is not as unpopular that the war with Gaza is among the Israeli public is because the matter of the hostages? I mean, it seems Hamas has a strategic leverage having the hostages, which is unfortunate, but it has made an impact on the Israeli public. The poll says that something about 60% of the Israeli public are not supportive of the war in Gaza. But when it comes to Hezbollah, it actually is reversed. 63 to 69 seems to be, at least according to Times of Israel, in favor of the conflict. Do you think, is there any chance that is there the reason that the war with Hezbollah is not as unpopular, the war with Hamas, is because of the hostages, or because the Hezbollah projects greater level of power, or what happens if Hezbollah actually gets his hands over the hostages? I mean, Israeli don't seem to be kind of fan of deals in such a scenarios. How do you see that?
I mean, I'm not surprised that the war against Hezbollah is more popular. I mean, they've seen Hezbollah as the greatest threat. I mean, they're known as like the arch enemy of Israel, or Nasrallah himself was even seen as the greatest threat to Israel, obviously because of proximity and the number of missiles guided, and some of them guided, precision-guided missiles that could hit specific targets in Israel. I mean, don't forget, since Hezbollah's involvement in this war on October 8th of last year, according to the Israelis, some 60,000, even high, I mean, there's some statistics that say as high as 100,000 Israelis have had to flee the north. I mean, this is what has been, according to Netanyahu, his main motivation for prosecuting the war to this extent. He wants the people to go back. I mean, he's demanding that Hezbollah push or withdraw itself from what is called the Blue Line, where the United Nations peacekeepers are present between what is supposed to be the Israeli-Lebanon border. There is no defined land border as of yet. There's only what they call the Blue Line, and they want Hezbollah to withdraw itself from the Blue Line, and they want the Lebanese army to be in full force and preventing any weapons, any attacks by groups towards Israel. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, your question is, why is this war more popular among the Israeli public?
Yeah.
I think it's precisely that. I mean, Hamas, what they did on October 7th, I don't think anyone would have predicted Hamas could do that. I mean, if you had described such an attack and asked me, which group do you think has the capabilities to pull it off, I would have said Hezbollah, not Hamas. But obviously Hamas is capable of doing such things. I don't think they're capable of doing now. And most Israelis in southern part of the country and near Gaza haven't been forced to flee, as far as I'm aware. Maybe you have numbers on this. They're not displaced from their homes in the same way people in North Israel have been displaced. So that may be the answer to your question, is simply Hezbollah's strength and the level of threat that it poses.
I would add a third thing, which is the observation that so far Israel has conducted the Hezbollah operation with a degree of success that's completely unparalleled in its history. Certainly far more successful than the ongoing conflict in Gaza has been, where they have been at this for coming up on a year now, and they still have not got Sinwar. They've of course killed many high-ranking Hamas leaders, and also sort of tens of thousands of foot soldiers. But the threat remains real. Obviously it's sort of transitioned to guerrilla warfare at this point, and this is a problem that doesn't really have an end in sight. And I think some of the Israeli reaction against that has been a function of, it doesn't seem like Netanyahu knows what he's doing. He's sort of playing whack-a-mole with Hamas, but they aren't in any position to get the hostages back. It doesn't look like they're going to get Sinwar either. And compare that with sort of this operation in Lebanon, which has been tremendously successful, which appears to have been planned months, if not years in advance. I mean, the business with the pagers last week was sort of had all the like fingerprints of the perfect Mossad operation that, they plan for months and they figure out every little detail, and it just comes together exactly the way that they want it to. So that I think that's a function of it as well. It's gone on for less of a time, and it's been far more successful than the South has been. I do want to take a step back here, because it's interesting that obviously Hamas, when they launched the October 7th attack last year, they didn't tell Iran, and they didn't tell Hezbollah either. And so Nasrallah was very much... Say again?
No, I was saying indeed. I had that conversation with someone earlier today, but please finish your point. I do want to add something to that.
Yeah, of course. So my question, when I was getting to it very long-windedly, was about sort of the factors that kept Hezbollah out of the war until now, because it's been a year. This just started, and over the last few months, we've seen sort of periodic missiles going back and forth across the border, but Hezbollah has not made any attempt to actually mount a full-scale invasion, which Nasrallah had repeatedly threatened to do and then eventually sort of never followed through on. And so I wondered if you could talk a bit about their response, sort of the strategic guardrails that were in place for them, and why those no longer seem to exist.
This is the conversation. Yeah, I like your analogy of whack-a-mole. I've used that as well. So I don't know if you've been spying on me and you saved that. So you stopped me from using it myself. So I can never forgive you for that entirely, Trevor. But all jokes aside, you're quite right. I mean, I think it's easy to play. Everyone loves to play Mike Tyson when you don't actually have to be in the fight. And for Hezbollah and Nasrallah, he would give these very long, belligerent speeches, very charismatically. And, once in a while, Hezbollah and Israel would go at it in the border, and one Israeli soldier would be killed, or a tank would be dismantled, or a truck an Israeli military envoy would be hit. And then, there's that balance of power that would always remain, the tit for tat move and the rules of engagement. You said that Hamas did not give any prior knowledge or heads up to Iran and the rest of the axis of resistance before October 7th. It seems like that is the case. And I think to some degree, maybe more. I mean, I've never spoken to anyone of Hezbollah about this. But I think they also feel Hamas has done them a great disservice because it basically called them out. And Hamas you have to remember something. Hezbollah has to operate within the framework of the Lebanese state. We talk about how it's a state within a state, and the Lebanese government is kind of at the behest or operates at the behest of Hezbollah. I think they're inconvenienced by Hezbollah's action, but I think also Hezbollah recognizes it has its limits. Why it has not, amounted a full-scale invasion or, an October 7th style attack on Israel is because it understands the context it operates in is not like Hamas. Hamas has no one to answer to, really, in Gaza. There's no other political party or community that they have to take into consideration. Gaza is not part of the international community in the same way Lebanon is. You talked about banks, Armand. I mean, Lebanon's banks, although they're essentially bankrupt and they're broken, but slowly they were rebuilding themselves, and they're still part of the international monetary system. And you still have international trade in Lebanon. You still had tourism coming in. So Lebanon it's a country. It operates like a relatively, dysfunctional, functional country. It's too many contradictions to point out. So maybe now with Nasrallah's death, Hezbollah will take off the gloves and maybe attack Israel with full force. One can never really know. But I think from Hezbollah's point of view, there's no better time to do it.
You mentioned.
I hope that answered your question, Trevor.
I think so. I do want to get into sort of the details of what Hezbollah's constraints are and what its relations are with sort of the other factions in Lebanon. But first, I will let Armand ask his question.
Oh, thank you. I think our questions have a bit of overlap. You mentioned about that, and you mentioned that. I think so far you mentioned it twice, which means it's a really important point, at least from your point of view, that the assassination of Nasrallah can actually pave the ground to change the political spectrum of the Lebanon. What I want to ask you that, look, Lebanon's political spectrum also once changed in early 1980s, 1982, and after that, when Israel invaded Lebanon. I think that's the time that Hezbollah, the Iranians sent the Mohammad Rasulullah division to the Syria visa Syria to Lebanon, established the core of the Hezbollah. Kind of everything in Lebanon, I think, started to gradually change. Amal lost its primary role in leading the Shias. Christian Maroon has been a little bit cast aside, they pushed us, and Hezbollah gradually came up. But that was the chaos of the early 90s that kind of assisted or enabled the Hezbollah. Do you think if today we will have another war, another ground invasion of Lebanon by Israel, or this war continues to be just escalated beyond it, which already is a kind of furious, at the furious level? Is there any chance that Lebanon's political spectrum again change? And if it change, is going to be for better or worse? Because while I understand that there might be an opportunity or window for the other political factions to take over, but some might also argue that when chaos arises, usually those who have arms and those who know how to operate within the chaos, they evidently would have the upper hand. If it happens, which way Lebanon is going to go? If there will be a ground invasion, what would happen to the Lebanon's political spectrum in day after the invasion?
Well, I mean, there'll be a war. It's going to be just like 2006, only on a larger scale. I don't see any reason why new leaders would not appear among Hezbollah or the Shia community, which is now in a state of grieving and mourning, but also ferocious anger and desire for revenge. And you mentioned Amal. Well, I know the leader, Speaker of Parliament, Nabi Berri, who is the leader of Amal and has been the leader of Amal for many, many years. And he's a former warlord, from the Civil War era. He said if the Israelis invade, and Amal will be the first to fight. So he's kind of trying to show he can one-up Hezbollah, not in the sense that he thinks Hezbollah is inferior, but he wants to show that he still has his willingness to fight. And look, Israel, every time it invaded Lebanon, it ended up having to withdraw. It withdrew in 2000, largely thanks to the credit of Hezbollah's guerrilla activities in the south, and it's just consistent attacks on Israel's occupation forces. When Israel attempted to cross into Lebanon again to dismantle and destroy Hezbollah, it didn't work in 2006. So I think Israel, if Hezbollah senses Israel will invade, yes, it will commit, extensive damage. I think you'll find thousands of people ended up getting killed, maybe more, who knows. But you'll see Hezbollah saying the gloves are off. There's no reason to hold back anymore. We are in a state of full-scale war. And we have to ask ourselves, is the Israeli public ready to endure such a conflict? I don't think so. I don't think either side really wants it. But it seems like Netanyahu is not letting anything hold him back.
I wonder if you can speak at all to the role that the other sort of major constituencies within Lebanon are playing within this crisis, because obviously the South, of course, is dominated by the Shia, but of course there are Maronites, there are Sunnis, there are Druze, there are various other constituencies that are looking at this with very, very grave concern. And in the event of an invasion, if there were a war, they would be caught in the crossfire, at least to some extent. And so I wonder if, based on your experience, you've seen the actions of their leaders, like whether they're trying to do anything to defuse this, or if they're at least preparing for it in any way.
I think they are taking as many steps as possible to diffuse it. People like Sami Jmail of the Kata'ib party, or Samir Jaja, the president of the Lebanese forces, predominantly both Maronite parties, are doing from their point of view, their best to try to de-escalate. They're meeting with the foreign dignitaries, ambassadors. I think what they want now is to see a president get elected and let that head of state decide how to proceed in dealing with the Israelis. I think they want the international community to help enforce a ceasefire. I have not spoken to either one in a good while, but I speak with at least the Lebanese forces media office as frequently as possible. And I know some independent MPs right now who are advocating for as much de-escalation as humanly possible. And the whole goal that their primary goal right now is to see a president elected. And their ultimate aim would like to see Hezbollah disarmed, sure. But I know many people who are in the opposition, they're saying an Israeli attack on Lebanon, an attack on Hezbollah specifically, is not the way we want to do things. I mean, I know people who did not like Hassan Nasrallah and criticized him and believed that he was part of uh, an assassination, a string of assassination on certain opposition leaders from what was called the March 14th Alliance. I'm sure you both are aware of it. But they never wanted to dance on his grave, so to speak, by the barrel of an Israeli gun or or an Israeli bomb. So, yes, people in the opposition who are against Hezbollah want to see Hezbollah disarmed, would like to see a president elected, but I do not think the heads of these parties are somewhat sympathetic to Israel. I mean, it wouldn't be good for them to do that. As for their constituents, there's not much their constituents will do if these leaders keep a lid on the flame. I mean, if they're not advocating for fighting Hezbollah, uh, I don't think that they'll do anything. I mean, they will protest and be angry. They'll want to stay at home. They want to stay away from the violence in this war as much as possible. But like in 2006, not much could have been done on the ground. No one was able to oppose Hezbollah from the inside on a practical level. I think Lebanon's solution, it needs the international and the regional community to come to some sort of agreement on what Lebanon's role would be.
I do have one more thing before I'll turn it over to Arman. And I read your article in the National Interest a few days ago, speaking about sort of the other crisis going on in Lebanon right now, where the institutions of state are literally bankrupt. They can't afford to pay salaries. They can't. Your article specifically was about sort of the pensions that were promised to former members of the military that they were just unable to pay. And so
Yes.
It seems as though this situation right now has two tiers to it, where on the one hand, there's a very public fight between Israel and Hezbollah with a number of other groups caught in the crossfire. And then underneath that, Lebanon as a state just seems to be falling apart. And this is something that has very much contributed to the instability that Hezbollah has taken advantage of. And so I wonder if you could speak at all to sort of the other problems that are underlying the Israel Hezbollah conflict and how they're sort of fueling them and making the crisis worse. Sorry.
You mean is how Hezbollah's actions making making things worse for the state or the institutions?
Well, not quite. What I mean is, how is the collective problem that Lebanon has as a nation, where everything is dysfunctional, feeding into what Hezbollah wants, feeding into sort of the fact that they are a relatively stable institution. Like you said, they have a bank that's the biggest bank in Lebanon. They're able to recruit sort of disaffected young Shia men to fight for them and those sorts of things.
Yeah, they got into Islamic banking as the economic crisis broke down. And yes, I mean, when the state is failing its citizens, particularly the Shia, they always turn to their representatives, the parties. And that's not exclusive to Hezbollah and Shia. I mean, everybody has to go to what they call Zaim in Arabic, their leader, or it's almost like a chieftain, or they have to rely on them for goods and services and cash handouts and assistances, basically, where if the state is not functioning properly, they have to go to the parties. Well, I mean, it's like, what's the saying, catch 22? I've written about this where well, if Hezbollah were to disarm, Hezbollah's presence undermines the state, but then the lack of a state also strengthens Hezbollah. So, I mean, this is where I say you need a regional and international dimensions to come together, and you need the global system, the international system, and the region, particularly Gulf countries, to come back and assist Lebanon and assist the state. But their primary, I say, their objection is Hezbollah's military presence. What they want is to see Hezbollah disarm, or they want Hezbollah to hand over its weapons to the Lebanese army and be part of what they call a national defense strategy. They want to see the implementation of the United Nations Resolution 1701, which was formulated after the 2006 war, or as part of what ended the 2006 war with Israel. But 1701 was never fully implemented on either side, Israel and Lebanon. I think ultimately that's what needs to happen. You need to maybe, I mean, some people think 1701 is dead. I disagree. I think you just need to reinforce it. And you need maybe to add some different provisions to 1701 as the situation has changed. So, I mean, I hope that answers your question. There's a lot to that question, I have to say.
Right. We're not making it easy for you here.
No, don't. I mean, I think, but hey, you don't count me out yet. I mean, I've been doing this for a while. And to be fair to myself, it's both of you two. I mean, it's 2 against 1. It's not fair.
We were a little worried about this. The last one of these we did with 2 experts.
When I heard it was just 2 against 1, I said, "Wow, that's really unfair for them. They're going up against me." I'm just kidding.
Well, we only bring on the best.
True.
Well, I only go on the best. So it's you guys are the. I've known you for a while, Trevor. I've read your work as well. You're very good at what you do. This Armand guy, I don't know who he is though. No, I'm just kidding.
I lost.
No. I'm just being cheeky. Come on.
I know. You're too kind.
No, but listen. I have left Lebanon many times, where, if for whatever reason, every time I leave, I say, despite my deepest criticisms of the state, I said, no, nothing can really change so long as Hezbollah operates as an independent military force. I've always believed that. I said, I just don't know how in any situation you could accept that as a normal thing. At the same time, I also have immense resentment towards how the state has, whenever it had a chance to implement things or to do things, it never really took action. I mean, look at this conflict, for example. Could the government have created evacuation sites? Could they have invested in some bunkers for people to flee to, in the same way the Israelis had invested for their citizens? I say yes, of course. How come Hezbollah didn't do the same? Instead, they insisted on building tunnels to store weapons and, for their fighters. I said, you could have done so many other things to help your people. Instead, you're in a state of chaos and pandemonium. So, I mean, there's just enough disappointment to spread all around.
That is very fair. We talk about the current circumstances. We could talk about the past circumstances, the root of today. I want to take it a little bit to the future. It seems a war is on the horizon. I don't want to get into the possibility or probability of it, but it seems to be on the horizon. We do know Israel has conducted various successful and accurate, high value target operation in terms of, removing the Hezbollah's high command. But the question is, you think to what extent, when the war takes place and arises, it's going to make an impact on Hezbollah's offensive capability in projecting threat against Israel, inflicting military pain? I mean, in terms of military capability, to what extent this assassination is kind of undermines Hezbollah in a full-fledged war with Israel, which might happen?
Well, I think it's already affecting them in a negative way. I mean, the fact that they're not even able to protect their top leaders, obviously, with the death of Nasrallah, the assassination of Nasrallah, it just shows how fragile the organization is. I mean, for a long time, we kind of painted the group. I mean, we describe this in many, you'll see think tanks and media outlets and journalists say this is the most powerful non-state actor in the world. I mean, how many times have we read that? And it's true, it is. But I guess it doesn't count for much in certain circumstances. You know, look, this can, any organization, any country is vulnerable, especially when you're dealing with a sophisticated enemy like the Israelis, and you have a leadership that's very determined for all the right or wrong reasons to go after Hezbollah. I mean, and I try to avoid hubris when I write and I report because, you know, I mean, many people, I'll give you one example to take it to another place. Like when Russia invaded Ukraine, I mean, a lot of people thought Russia was just going to roll in and knock Kiev down and they're just going to plant the Russian flag on. And, you know, and
I was one of those people.
You were one of those people, Trevor? God damn it.
So.
I was so not one of those people. I was convinced, listen, I was convinced that if Russia invades, it was just going to be in the Donbass, like a few provinces in the east, because correct me if I'm wrong, it was just a force of 190,000 Russian soldiers of some, or around 200,000 Russian soldiers. I said, yeah, Ukraine is a big country with tens of millions of people. They're going to just start throwing sticks at the Russians if that's what it takes. I mean, I said, no, Ukraine and it had a very large armed forces army. So I thought, no, I think if Russia ever took over Kiev, then they would have to deal with a people's resistance of some kind. I was not convinced that he would go as far as he did, but well, I mean, I was wrong too. But there was this sense that Russia is an all-powerful, mighty country that's prepared to, almost reminiscence of the Soviet Union, and the talk of Putin had brought it back to its former glory. I think that's a bit too much hubris, and they're exaggerating the capabilities of the Russians. On the one hand, yes, I think Russia would have probably won this war by now if it wasn't for NATO support. But I don't want to discount the bravery and the courage of the Ukrainians. And as for the people of Lebanon, despite what Israel possesses militarily, I don't think that they would come out of that war victorious. I don't say they'd be defeated in the sense that Hezbollah would just waltz into Israel and do what they've said they've always done and defeat Israel. No, I think you will see a huge bloodbath followed by some sort of agreement that would put an end to the fighting permanently. But again, I don't like to make assumptions or predictions, but I think that's the closest thing that we can expect at this moment.
There is one thing I would say comparing the situation in Russia and Ukraine to the situation in Lebanon, which is I'm friends with various journalists who used to cover Russia and would attend the Kremlin's like media sessions when they sort of sit all the reporters down every week and they say, here's what you want to cover and so on. And it's remarkable the degree to which from around the year 2008 until 2014, 2015, the Russian consumption of information changed. And this is supposed to be a podcast about Lebanon, so I won't belabor this point too much. But
I'm happy bringing this up. But comparisons of this kind are effective and I think necessary.
Right. Well, what I was going to say about Putin was the Russian state sort of information apparatus has always had a certain narrative that it wants to convey. And again, this gets back to this point where it used to be that every weekend they'd pull all the media guys in Moscow together and they'd sit them down at a table and they say, this is what we want you to talk about this week. So they always had that information control dynamic. But it used to be, prior to around 2012 to 2014, that Russia had a narrative that they promoted, but they actually secretly knew what was going on in the world. They understood the truth, even if that wasn't what they were saying. And then at some point around 10 years ago, they started to get high on their own supply. They started to believe the narrative that they were promoting, that Russia was very, very strong and Ukraine was run by Nazis or whatever. And everybody in Eastern Ukraine secretly wanted to be part of Russia. And, all of the things that went into informing the invasion in February 22 that ended so spectacularly badly because Putin was under the impression that people there were just going to greet him as liberators or whatever. And so this is the comparison I make with Lebanon. I don't think that Hezbollah has ever had sort of anywhere near the amount of self-delusion that Putin appears to have had. When you have an enemy like Israel, you can't afford that, And so going back to what you said earlier, Nasrallah, when he was alive, seemed to have a very clear understanding of his own limitations, seemed to know that there were certain things that he couldn't do. And, launching a ground invasion of Israel was probably one of those. Although, again, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Look, I think when it came to Nasrallah, a lot of people who even, I've been talking to some people on the ground who they say, we respected that he was at least a very honest man. They always found him to be very honest. And there was even a point where Hezbollah supporters would say even Israeli citizens believe him more than they believe their own politicians. Because, for a long time, Nasrallah was seen as someone who just kept it real and was living in the real world. He was not getting, as the phrase you high on his own supply. He wasn't one of these he was dissimilar to the Arab dictators of the past that would believe their own propaganda to some extent, or at least try to give you these grandiose speeches with these lofty promises. I think Nasrallah always believed what he said, but didn't believe that he could implement everything at any time he chose, if that makes sense. So I think he really believed that he could defeat Israel in a grand, battle, but not at any time he chose. I think he felt he was always building up to that moment. Mm-hmm. And you talked about the Russians believing their own propaganda. The thing is about Lebanon is that there is a free press to some degree. It's a kind of, corrupted free press. Free press has gotten worse. Freedom of speech has gotten tougher. I've covered issues of free speech in Lebanon, but you have different media outlets that can give you different narratives, and Lebanese have access to foreign media in a way that I think Russians don't. So you can, people believe what they want, and Lebanon's media and the conversations you hear are very diverse and colorful. You could go to any part of Beirut, any cafe or pub, and you'll just hear some amazing conspiracy theories. And then you can also go on and turn on the Lebanese TV, and you can watch Al Jazeera, you can watch Al Arabiya, Hezbollah's Al Manar, or NBN, or MTV, Lebanon MTV, or OTV. So you have access to different information in ways that the Russians don't. And the thing is, the state doesn't promote one narrative. You have to remember, it's not the state that's promoting these narratives. It's the parties and different individuals. And now you have new media opening up in Lebanon, digital media. So what I write, Lebanese can read. What you write, Lebanese can read. There's no limitation on access. You can even read Israeli media. You have internet access. Just be careful who's watching you read it. You don't want to go in the middle of Dahia, turn on your laptop in a cafe and read. Let me see what the Times of Israel is saying today. Don't do that.
Have a good instinct for self-preservation here.
Yeah, exactly. You should. Well, you should. Let's not be. We're not suicidal.
I have a question which kind of leads us to the wrapping up, if you don't mind. I mean, unless Trevor has something to add to it. You talk about you mentioned that Nasrallah was building up to a grand war. And he kind of believed that if that grand war happened, they might have been. I don't want to talk about his win, his calculation, how he saw that grand war. But it seems there is a war coming, or as you mentioned, that we may be already in it to some extent. How is this going to end, in your view, as an expert of Lebanese politics? What's the end game of the ongoing Israeli-Hezbollah's exchange of fire and conflict that happens today?
Let me just answer by saying, let me not be called an expert, please. I hate that word. I think experts should be reserved for engineers and medical professionals. Yeah, the expert. I'm what I'd say. Yes, I'm well educated or experienced and involved. I try to inform myself, but expert, you're only as good as your last meal if you're a chef. So it's kind of like if I have to use that analogy. Look, I think we're in the midst of that war. I've said for a long time the next war, the third Lebanon war, as media outlets would call it. I said I think that's going to be the last war. I can't imagine that either side would want to keep this up and have this sort of long pause. I said, what is the long pause for? They're preparing for a war. I thought maybe Hezbollah thought with its strengthening of its arsenal and having more precision-guided weapons and what they call game-changing weapons, the Israelis would be hesitant to go too far, and that they would just have this sort of very long, cold secession of fighting, not peace, but secession of fighting. And that slowly but surely time would be on Hezbollah's side, or people have the mindset of Hezbollah, people like in Iran and this axis of resistance. They thought slowly Israel will just keep making mistakes. And as time goes on, we will grow stronger and stronger. And that's when we can have this battle with the Israelis. Maybe they also thought, because I don't want to put any words in the mouth of these people, but maybe they thought also demographics would be an advantage that they had. Maybe the Arab population or the Palestinian population in the West Bank and Gaza would maybe force a collapse. I think they always felt maybe the state of Israel would collapse at some point, and you would have that one-state solution. You see many people advocating for a one-state solution. I don't know if I'm mentioning too many things and putting them together where they don't belong, but I truly believe that they thought time was on their side, not Israel's.
Thank you. That about does it for us. Do you have any sort of final thoughts on this that you would leave us with? How do you sort of see the future of Lebanon playing out?
What a question. I don't know. Not good right now, not in the short term. I'm hoping in the long run, or in the long term, you will see Lebanon recover. I mean, before October 7th of 2003, Hamas's attack on Israel, the economy was slowly recovering because of tourism. You saw, I mean, life was still hard for most Lebanese, but people were adapting with tourism coming in and still trade. You saw small businesses opening up everywhere. There is a possibility. I'm optimistic. I like to be cautiously optimistic. I don't think anything lasts forever, honestly, good or bad. We just need the leaders to make the right decisions, and we need the United States to be fair. The one thing that I am concerned about, here's my final thoughts. I am deeply disheartened by the Biden administration and the whole U.S. foreign policy as a whole when it comes to the Middle East. I mean, when they give these very, very, what I would stupid answers, when they say things like, "Where did you know that Israel was involved in all this?" And they say we had no idea or we're not involved. I personally don't believe it. And I said that you could. People are not stupid, Trevor. And people in Lebanon are regardless of their lifestyle or how they view America, across the board, people just have this distrust of U.S. foreign policy. And I think America being overtly one-sided in favor of Israel is not going to help it in the long run in dealing with the rest of the region. Matter of fact, I think it's going to create more resentment. And I would like to see the U.S. play a positive role, but I think we're a long way from there.
Well, there are many in the United States who are sympathetic to this view as well, or at least are of the view that the U.S. and Israel are drifting apart, and what you've seen over the last year has been a byproduct of that. Anyways, I really want to thank you for coming on here, Adnan. You don't like to be called an expert, but you are one of the most knowledgeable people I know about this part of the world. We're very grateful you could find the time for us. To all of our watchers at home, please pay attention to this man. His name is Adnan's Outlook 29 on Twitter. So please follow him. If you feel like following us, our username is Balancing Pod as well. Yeah.
If I may add something, I want to first thank you for those kind words, Trevor. I really do appreciate that, and I've also followed you over the years and read your work, and you've definitely been a good friend to talk to at times about this, and I hope we all stay in touch more, and I'm happy to come back anytime.
I hope so as well. So if you enjoyed this conversation, feel free to like it and to follow us on social media. Again, our username is @BalancingPod on Twitter. We're going to try and do our next episode probably within October at some point. We're still working out the topic, but it won't be too far away from this. Once again, thank you all for listening, and we will see you soon.